The summer of 1878 had been the driest anyone could remember. The creek that ran along the eastern edge of Jacob Mercer's property had slowed to a trickle, and his cattle gathered in clusters beneath the few cottonwood trees that still offered shade. He stood on the porch of his small ranch house, watching the sun sink behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of copper and rose. 3 years he had worked this land alone. 3 years since Sarah had taken the fever and left him with nothing but memories and an empty bed. The neighbors in town, what few there were, had stopped asking when he might remarry. They had stopped inviting him to church socials and barn dances. Jacob Mercer had made it clear through silence and solitude that he wanted to be left alone with his grief. But grief, he was learning, made for poor company. He was about to turn inside when movement caught his eye. Something was coming across the flatland from the north, moving slow and unsteady. Jacob squinted against the fading light, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle that leaned against the doorframe. As the figure drew closer, he realized it was a woman. She was walking barefoot, her dark hair tangled and wild around her shoulders. Her clothing was torn and dusty, and even from a distance he could see she was struggling with each step. Jacob left the rifle and moved down from the porch, crossing the yard with long strides. By the time he reached her, she had stopped walking. She stood swaying slightly, her dark eyes meeting his with a mixture of defiance and exhaustion that he had never seen in a woman before. She was Apache. That much was clear from her features and the remnants of traditional dress that still clung to her frame. She was young, maybe 25 summers, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw. Despite her obvious fatigue, there was nothing weak about the way she held herself. "You need water," Jacob said, the first words he had spoken aloud in days. She nodded once, a small movement that seemed to cost her tremendous effort. He offered his arm and, after a moment of hesitation, she took it. Her grip was surprisingly strong as he led her back to the house. He could feel the heat radiating from her skin, the slight tremor in her muscles. She was near collapse, running on nothing but willpower. Inside, he sat her at the rough wooden table and pumped water into a tin cup. She drank deeply, emptying it twice before setting it down. Color began to return to her face, and her breathing steadied. "When did you last eat?" he asked. She held up 3 fingers. Jacob moved to the stove, where a pot of beans and salt pork had been simmering. He ladled out a generous portion and set it before her, along with a hunk of bread that was only a day old. She ate with careful deliberation, not wolfing down the food as he had expected, but savoring each bite as though it might be her last. While she ate, he studied her more closely. There were bruises on her arms, some fresh and purple, others fading to yellow. A cut on her forehead had scabbed over but looked like it had been deep. Someone had hurt this woman, and recently. "What's your name?" he asked when she finally pushed the empty plate away. "Alope," she said. Her voice was low and musical, accented but clear. "It means fox in your language. I'm Jacob. This is my ranch. You're safe here." Something flickered in her eyes at that word. Safe, as though it was a concept she had forgotten existed. "I need to rest," she said, "one night. Then I will go." "Go where?" She did not answer. Jacob gave her his bed, the only proper bed in the house, and made himself a pallet by the stove. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the night, alert for any sign of pursuit. Whoever had hurt this woman might come looking for her. But the hours passed in silence, and eventually he slept. When he woke at dawn, she was already up. She had found his late wife's dress, a simple blue cotton thing that Sarah had worn for everyday work, and put it on. It fit her surprisingly well, though she had belted it with a strip of leather to gather in the waist. She had washed her face and combed her hair, and in the soft morning light, Jacob found himself staring. She was beautiful, not in the delicate way that Sarah had been beautiful, but in the way that a hawk is beautiful, or a mountain storm. There was power in her, barely contained. "You did not have to give me your bed," she said. "You needed it more than I did. Still, it was kind. I have not experienced much kindness lately." He wanted to ask what had happened to her, where she had come from, who had marked her skin with violence, but he sensed that pushing too hard would only drive her away. "Breakfast?" he offered instead. She almost smiled. Yes. They ate together, eggs and bacon and more of the bread. She ate less ravenously than the night before, and when she finished, she sat back and looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes. "You live here alone," she said. It was not a question. "For 3 years now. Your woman is gone. She died. Fever." Alope nodded slowly. "My husband is also dead, killed by soldiers at the reservation. They said he was trying to escape, but he was only trying to find food for our children." "You have children?" The pain that crossed her face was so raw that Jacob immediately regretted asking. "I had children, 2 boys. They took them from me, sent them to one of the white schools in the East. I will never see them again." Her voice was steady as she said this, but her hands had clenched into fists on the table. Jacob understood then the depths of loss she carried, loss that perhaps matched his own. "I'm sorry," he said, knowing the words were inadequate. "I tried to get them back. That is how I got these." She gestured to her bruises. "The soldiers at the reservation did not appreciate my persistence. You escaped. I ran for many days. They may still be looking for me. I should not stay here. I will bring trouble to your door." Jacob looked at this woman, this survivor who had lost everything and still had the strength to think of a stranger's well-being. "Let them come," he said quietly. "I could use the excitement." She did not leave that day, or the next. At first she kept to herself, resting and recovering her strength. But by the 3rd day she began to help around the ranch. She knew how to work, knew how to handle horses with a gentle firmness that surprised him. She mended fences alongside him without being asked, and when he showed her how to use Sarah's old vegetable garden, she attacked the overgrown plot with determined efficiency. They spoke little at first, exchanging only the words necessary for the work at hand. But slowly, as the days stretched into weeks, conversations began to grow. She told him about her childhood, about the traditions of her people, about the sacred mountains where she had played as a girl. He told her about his years as a young man in Ohio, about coming west with dreams of building something that was his own, about Sarah and the future they had planned together. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she said something that stayed with him long. "Terror, you are a good man, Jacob Mercer, but you have been hiding from life." He considered denying it, but found he could not. "Maybe I have. Your wife would not want this for you. I did not know her, but I know this. The ones who love us want us to live, even after they are gone. Is that why you keep going? For your boys?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I keep going because to stop would be to let them win. The ones who took everything from me. I will not give them that satisfaction." The summer began to fade into autumn, and still Alope stayed. No soldiers came looking for her. Perhaps they had given up, or perhaps they simply did not care enough to pursue one Apache woman into the vast emptiness of the territory. Either way, Jacob found himself grateful for their indifference. He had grown accustomed to her presence in ways he had not expected. The house no longer felt empty. The silence that had once been suffocating now felt companionable. He caught himself looking forward to the evenings when they would sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes simply sharing the peace of the fading day. But he noticed other things too. The way she moved, graceful and strong. The sound of her laughter, rare but genuine, when something amused her. The way she looked at him sometimes, with an expression he could not quite decipher. One night, a storm rolled in from the mountains. Thunder shook the little house, and lightning turned the darkness to noon. Jacob was sitting by the fire when Alope emerged from the bedroom, wrapped in a blanket, her hair loose around her shoulders. "I cannot sleep," she said. "The thunder reminds me of the guns." He moved over on the bench, making room for her. She sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. For a long time, they watched the fire in silence while the storm raged outside. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have gone too long without a man, without touch, without someone to hold me in the night and make me feel that I am not alone in this world." Jacob's heart hammered against his ribs. He turned to look at her and found her already looking at him, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "I am not asking for promises," she continued. "I know that your heart still belongs to your wife, but I am asking for tonight, for comfort, for something to remind me that I am still alive." He should have said no. He should have thought of Sarah, of propriety, of the 1,000 reasons why this was complicated and potentially painful for them both. But when he looked at Alope, he did not see complication. He saw a woman who had survived unspeakable loss and still had the courage to ask for what she needed, and he realized, with a clarity that surprised him, that he needed it too. "I'm not asking for promises either," he said, "but I think maybe we both deserve a little comfort." She leaned into him then, her head resting against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. They stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other, while the storm slowly exhausted itself and the fire burned down to embers. What happened that night was not about passion, though there was warmth in it. It was about two broken people finding solace in each other, about hands that reached out in the darkness and found something solid to hold on to. It was about remembering that even after everything had been taken away, there was still the possibility of connection. In the morning, she was still there, and the morning after that, and all the mornings that followed. They never spoke of love, at least not in those early months, but they built something together nonetheless. She taught him the Apache words for sunrise and gratitude and hope. He taught her to read from Sarah's old Bible, though she preferred the Psalms to the sterner passages. Together they expanded the garden, repaired the barn roof, and brought the ranch back to life. The neighbors in town eventually noticed that Jacob Mercer had a woman living with him. Some whispered and disapproved. Others, the ones who had known the weight of loneliness themselves, simply nodded in understanding. The world was hard and you took your comfort where you found it. One spring morning, nearly a year after she had stumbled onto his land, Alope woke him with news that changed everything. "I am with child," she said, her hand pressed to her belly, her eyes searching his face for a reaction. Jacob sat up slowly, his mind racing. A child. After all these years, after he had given up on the idea of family, here was this possibility laid before him like a gift. "Are you happy?" he asked, because her expression was difficult to read. "I am terrified," she admitted. "I have lost children before. I do not know if my heart can survive that again." He took her hands in his, holding them firmly. "Then we will face that fear together. Whatever happens, you will not face it alone." She broke then, the walls she had so carefully maintained crumbling at last. She wept against his chest, and he held her, and he made a silent vow to whatever forces governed the universe that he would protect this woman and their child with everything he had. The baby came in December, a girl with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. They named her Hope, because that was what she represented. A new beginning, a bridge between two worlds that had collided in the most unexpected way. Years later, when Hope was old enough to ask about how her parents had met, Alope would tell her the story. She would describe the long walk across the desert, the kindness of a lonely rancher, the storm that, brought them together. She would speak of loss and healing, of the courage it took to reach for someone when you had nothing left to give. And Jacob would add, in his quiet way, that sometimes the best things in life came to you when you had stopped looking for them. That love was not always a lightning strike. Sometimes it was a slow sunrise, gradual and gentle, until one day you realized that the darkness had lifted and you could see clearly again. They lived out their days on that little ranch, watching their daughter grow, watching the territory become a state, watching the world change around them, while their love remained constant. It was not a perfect life. There were hardships and sorrows, as there always are, but there was also joy, deep and abiding, the kind that comes from building something true with another person. And when Jacob Mercer finally closed his eyes for the last time, his hand was in hers, and his heart was full. The lonely rancher was lonely no more.